It's the SDG Podcast. Before we get started, you can check us out on the web at solutiondesign.com/podcast or find us on all the social medias, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Solution Design.
Peter Lawrence.
Hi there.
As usual. And we got some, one fresh face. Camille's been on before. We have Camille Westfall joining us. And John Brindle is joining us as well. So we're going to talk about the idea of letting AI speak for your company. So chat bots, generated content, all that kind of stuff that people might be getting into. Thought about this based on a clickbait story that was not true, which is that a car dealership sold a vehicle for $1 because AI gave that price out. Well, that wasn't true. But this an app they were using for their chatbot powered by ChatGPT was allowing people to go in and just ask other questions as if they were using ChatGPT. And a lot of the recommendations and things it was giving people were for other vehicles. So if you went to the Chevy website and started asking about trucks, it might offer up a Ford F-150. So that's kind of where I think we're starting. And John is one of our new data scientists, specialists. He does a lot with large language models, so he can speak to that side of things. Camille is one of our user experience, design, usability, everything else under that auspices, because there is a user impact to all this. So my first question is going to be for John. How reliable are large language models right now?
Large language models are reasonably reliable for a subset of problems. They're not generally useful for all problems. So I think it kind of depends on the domain that you're in. But I think kind of what you're getting at here is like to what extent should a business trust in these models? Should a business let these models make business decisions for them, speak for them? Short answer is don't right now. The way I like to think about it is you should trust a large language model with tasks you would trust an intern with. You're not going to have an intern go and speak about company policy to a customer because they might get it wrong, right? And pretty much any work you assign an intern to do, you're going to have somebody looking over their shoulder and making sure they're doing it right. And the intern is still providing value. They are doing things that Kyle's shaking his head here.
I've had interns.
They're still providing value. They're still doing something that, you don't have to have an FTE assigned to do. And at this point, I would say, keep your large language models doing tasks like that. I'm not saying that that's the case forever. We're kind of at the point where they're the worst they're ever going to be. And so as time goes on, we can start to think about trusting them more. Same way when you have a new employee, you spend some time getting to know them, getting to know what they're good at and what they're bad at. And then you start to give them more responsibilities as time goes on.
Or you invite them on a podcast.
There you go.
Yeah. So, there's a lot of chat bots. Chat bots have been around for a while, and it's kind of the back end has just kind of been a flow chart. Are you asking about this? It kind of has you drill into the topics. But with the AI behind it, that experience has changed, hasn't it, Camille? So what is that impact? What has changed about that?
So there has been research about what users perceive the differences in generative AI tools versus, kind of traditional, what we think of when we think of, digital interactions, intake forms with those more narrow chatbots that are kind of canned responses. And what research has shown is that there are two elements that users really weigh heavily when they're experimenting with these AI interactions. There is the pragmatic side, so the practical side. Is it a efficient and helpful conversation with useful information? But there's also an entertainment or hedonic side to the experience. So there's this entertainment aspect that folks have as that secondary goal when they're interacting with an AI tool. It's kind of fun to talk to something that is kind of like talking to a human. You kind of don't know what you're going to get from the other side. And so that can be kind of fun, right? So there's that entertainment and novelty aspect to it, especially right now, as there's a lot of, new stuff coming out all the time, new updates and ChatGPT getting better and better and other models getting better and better with more data. So I would say that from the user perspective, those are kind of the two things that users see changing a lot, and they kind of weighing those two aspects when they're interacting with any AI experience.
So kind of like developers, when they get a new intern, will maybe, try to get some humor out of the intern, asking hard questions and things like that, maybe.
Exactly.
Getting him to sweat a little bit. Yeah. Assigning him impossible tasks. Yeah. And then they complete them and then they take your job. No, I'm kidding. Now, the intern aspect, I've had a few interns and a few direct reports that I've trained, not here, at other places that nobody knows about. And it was always like it made my life worse before it got better, because it took a lot of my time to redo what the intern did and correct what the intern did and answer all those questions they had. So I see this as kind of being the same thing where, like, yeah, you can have your chat bot, your LLM and all that answering these questions, but you need somebody that's more experienced, like going, no, don't talk about the Fords. This is a Chevy dealership. And,
that's the amazing thing about chatbots, right? Is they're willing to answer every question. They are willing to give you an answer. Whether that answer is right or wrong, they don't really know, because they're just a machine, right? We don't think they're doing it maliciously, right? Because, testing and stuff like that, but they are going to answer everything. They're not afraid to put an answer out there, just like an intern sometimes. And I don't want to beat that horse too hard, but, that is amazing how, just to look at some of the news articles, obviously the worst case scenarios are bubbling up to the top, and you get to see like, oh yeah, well, that chatbot lied. It had no idea what the score of last night's game was, because it was trained 3 years ago and the game hadn't been played, but it gave you a score.
Yeah, I think that's a really important part of, right, and I think maybe you're going to jump in here, John, and talk about training data. But I'll also say that both training data that the AI has to work with and how it's been trained, and then the user research side of what users are actually going to do with that information, what your users actually need. Those are two really important things to know that determine what you can acceptably do with an AI tool.
Yeah. Awesome. I want to come back to that, Camille. Go ahead, John.
I think what I was going to bring up was a slightly different topic, but related. I feel like when you're talking about some of these examples that rise to the surface of like particularly bad business decisions that were driven by AI, another aspect of this that we're not really talking about is like a lot of this is stuff being rushed to market.
Right.
These systems are not ready. They need to be doing a lot more internal testing. They need to be doing, setting up like a RAG architecture to, and these things take time. Like you need to put extensive testing into there. You need to like really invest in making this model good before you put it out to market. And, I think, for instance, the Air Canada thing, like that was goodness. Putting that chatbot out there and letting it make decisions about policy or making recommendations about policy. Yeah.
John, do you want to just give a little bit more flavor to people that don't recognize that Air Canada thing?
Yeah, so there was a situation recently where a person was interacting with a chatbot that was set up by Air Canada. I believe they were asking about bereavement fares, and they asked a question. The chatbot gave a wrong answer, and this person essentially said, well, I was speaking to a representative of the company, and so under Canadian law, you have to honor that, honor what I was told, and that's kind of been held up. But, frankly, Air Canada probably didn't need to be using that chatbot yet. They needed to spend a little bit more time kind of tuning the models and doing a little
They should have had their customer service person typing in the same thing into chatbot and then looking at the answer and going, no, I don't think so. That's not quite right. Here's what it should be, and type that, right?
Yeah. And I think in the tech world, we kind of have gotten used to this cycle where a new technology comes around and it just completely revolutionizes the way that we do our work. And you can realize huge efficiencies just by like minimal investments and kind of like quick deployment of things. Machine learning is a little bit different. Like you really got to make sure that the data is there, the data is complete. You're otherwise going to end up in kind of a GIGO situation, right?
Sure. Which brings me back to what I was going to follow up with you, Camille. Like you're talking about training. Can you train, or have you heard about training where you get that specific, all the HR data, get the whole employee manual into training, and then is it going to spit out the right answers every time? Or
training makes a difference. That's what we know. Training absolutely makes a difference. Obviously, when we talk about AI, we talk about it like, oh, it's this monolith, but really it's a new technology, a new tool, a new way of using machine learning to try and predict and generate responses. And so what the model is doing with whatever data it has is, that's kind of the base it's working from. That's its working knowledge. It doesn't have these things like the idea of what language is or what words actually mean. Right. It just has associations and, percentages of probability of the next word in a sentence, right? Or how things are conceptually maybe linked based on probability. So those are things that AI is working from. Depending on the model, you're going to have different levels of, data for various types of topics. So particularly in business settings, this is a big deal because a general knowledge base doesn't have all the information about your particular business. So that kind of goes back to what I was saying a little earlier about training data and user research. You need a generous amount of training data, like, billions of data points to have a really high confidence threshold. And confidence thresholds are something you can get from a human rating the responses of an AI model. And that can help you determine how good your model is getting at predicting the next thing. So the way that I've seen it talked about in business settings, the way I've seen it at certain companies is usually there's kind of a starting point with a general chatbot that has more open, flexible answers, flexible topics, more general knowledge base, but it should not take the user to their end goal. It'll take you to kind of a starting point. So it won't recommend, like in the ideal scenario, when you use something like this, it won't recommend that that particular fare for Air Canada is a certain dollar amount, right? It'll just take you to the right page of an FAQ page, right, to get started with answering your question. Nice. So it won't take you to the endpoint. So that's the general side. You start there so that you can start understanding what users are asking about, understanding what your model is producing, and then through monitoring how those conversations go, you can build enough training data to then, get more specific with business queries. Maybe you get a little bit further into the end goal of the user, taking them through that path. Maybe you talk them through a couple forms or something like that, right? And that can lead you to something like building a co-pilot. So something that's embedded in the digital experience that provides, coaching suggestions as you're going through a workflow. But you can't get there without a ton of training data about what users are going to say and do and what your business is expecting as output and like stylistically how you're expecting the AI to respond to a user. So it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of training. And that confidence threshold needs to be like upwards of 75% to get, even started with testing. Like you really want it high so that users aren't getting the wrong information. We talked about that idea of pragmatic interactions. They need to be useful and they need to be efficient.
So John, you're nodding along quite a bit.
Yeah, she's describing it quite well, like what you need to do to build a good large language model and to deploy it effectively within your organization. Have y'all talked about RAG at all? I think that's a concept that's kind of worth talking about here. So RAG is kind of a framework for how to set up a large language model. It's called...
I hope it's an acronym.
It is. It stands for Retrieval Augmented Generation.
There we go.
And essentially the idea is that a large language model is trained on a very general corpus of data that is going to go... It explores just about every topic under the sun. It's like training on Wikipedia or something, right?
Yep.
And when you get like a very large general knowledge base like that, you're going to have difficulty answering very specific questions about certain domains because you have generalized so much about the way that the language model actually operates.
So is that like Kyle and 80s trivia that he has a little bit of trouble with, or 90s trivia because he grew up in those eras and has a lot of general knowledge, but not specific about,
right. It's
death metal rock bands.
If it's movie and TV from like 1970 through now, I got this. But if it's like geography, No.
Yeah, and so like with geography, for instance, like I think this is a good example. You learned about geography back in school, the same as we all did. You have a certain base level knowledge and understanding of geography. But if I were to ask you a very specific question about like, is Estonia to the north or the south of Lithuania? You're probably going to have a hard time with that, right?
I'm not even sure that it is either of those.
Yeah. So, but like with retrieval augmented generation, what I would do is I would be handing you a map or an atlas, and I would be like, study this and like learn, get this top of mind. Like you're going to have an image of Europe. You're going to be able to, before you are asked that question, you're going to be able to refresh yourself on that knowledge and get like more specific domain knowledge. An example that I heard that I actually kind of like a lot. Somebody said, it's like if you were to ask somebody which planet in the solar system has the most moons, like if I hear that, I'm going to automatically go, Jupiter, probably. Like it's the biggest planet. I think I learned that back when I was 12 or something. I don't know. But like, I'm not an astronomer. I haven't really spent any time deep in that. And I don't know for certain. But, if you were to ask me, I think I could, like, with reasonable confidence say, yeah, it's probably Jupiter. And that's what a large language model with a general knowledge base is going to do. But with retrieval augmented generation, it would be like, okay, I want to give you this article about the solar system and, like, about the number of moons around each planet. And then I read that before I answer the question. Actually, it turns out it's Saturn. Saturn has more moons than Jupiter. Who knew?
I did.
There you go. That's the idea with retrieval augmented generation.
Next time we make Kyle answer the question before.
I was waiting for you to correct yourself. I didn't want to make you look bad. It's the moon. No. So how do you now to head down a path to get the confidence level up there enough, and how do you prevent losing the confidence level of the people's when it's not ready? Like there's this kind of crossover where it's ready, but the people are not real happy with their history with it, so now that has to be overcome. So how do you, like, this is because I want this from both the user side and the kind of the back end data side. John, how would you go about starting that process of training models if, say, a company came to us and they wanted a chat bot to answer all sorts of difficult questions for them?
I would start with a pretty good pre-trained model. Most of the time, the work of data science these days is not about creating new models or building them from scratch. So I would go to a website called Hugging Face and look for a model that seems to be trained for a pretty similar domain to what the client is asking about. And then I would also have a conversation with the client about what kind of data resources do you have available for setting up kind of a RAG architecture. I think it's also going to depend on what are they wanting to use this for. Is it, kind of a low stakes internal tool that nobody's going to put a lot of stock in what it says? It's really just to help you, explore large repositories of documents? Or is this like a customer facing tool where we need to be really, really sure that it's giving the right answer? Because there's going to be a cost associated with doing retrieval augmented generation, right? That's a lot more complicated than just using a model off the shelf. So, I think it really depends on what is the user expecting. If it's an internal user who is reasonably tech savvy and understands that, large language models are what they are, and I'm going to place about as much stock in them as they deserve to have. You may not need to do much more beyond just using the kind of off the shelf model. But yeah, if you're going to put it in front of a customer, I would not advise just off the shelf models.
So you have to pick the right battles, start with lower stakes. Camille, how do you deal with that from the user side? And when I see an answer from ChatGPT, I immediately believe it and go all in. So someone like me versus a tech savvy person like Peter is skeptical about any answer. How do you get me to understand that that's, questionable information, or how do you get that information vetted? What would you do from the kind of the user side of things?
Yeah. So again, it goes back to more questions from the business point of view of yes, we want to make sure what exact context you want this tool to be used in. What are you expecting your users to be able to do with this? And then from there, we need to say, okay, going back to our intern analogy, it needs to be supervised when you first start out so that you know how confident you are in your model. You have to take measurements. Otherwise, you're not going to know if it's doing what you're expecting it to do. I think that's where we see a lot of these news cases surfacing where there's really bad responses is it's not being measured and it needs to be measured and monitored. So not only, we talked about earlier, collecting all that training data, doing user research up front, understanding what you actually want it to do for your users, you also need to do these monitoring things. So at first it's going to be maybe it's a tool that you're testing out internally, or you're going to have your customer service representative just like have it on one window and then their normal stuff on another window, and monitor its responses to what the customer's asking for, so that you can that's what they did with ChatGPT in the beginning. They had human raters rate all of its responses, thousands and thousands of people rating thousands and thousands of responses to get it to be tuned. And so if you have really specific domain knowledge, or you want this tool to be used ultimately for something that is like policy-based or has a lot of money behind it, or, customers buying decisions, things like that, you're going to want to have training done by humans, training that AI intern to do the right thing. And that's going to take some time. It's going to take some time and some hours, and you have to know that up front. So that's part of the decision-making process when you first start out thinking about how your users are actually going to use an AI tool.
Yeah, and we talked about stakes. What are the stakes of this thing? And starting with something with lower stakes to kind of get a toe in the water where a user isn't going to freak out. So we have we're a company, we have benefits. One of the ideas early on was maybe we can make a chatbot to answer benefits questions. Then I was like, no, bad. We're not doing that. Well, it's only a test. Okay, if it's only a test, then it stays a test. But this is a minefield. There's one person that I will listen to about benefits questions, or I will go read the stuff. But, I trust her more than I trust the articles that's out there. And, if it's out there just using search to index everything and all of that information in those documents and pull that in and then do its thing, is that data source correct? Or do we have 5 years of benefits information out there?
Oh yeah. Benefits change, right?
Yeah. Every year, sometimes during the year. I know that my agreement on my phone changes every 5 minutes and I have to, re-up for some reason. What's a good first step? Because everybody seems interested in benefiting from AI. And we got a lot of people just using ChatGPT to answer questions, to help understand things better, to do conversions from metric to the correct way of measuring things, which wasn't an answer, it was a lesson. But how do you begin? I mean, do you even have the data? Do you what's the first real step here?
I mean, John, maybe, yeah, you talked about Hugging Face. Is that step 0 or is that step 15?
I'd say it's more like step 3 or so. I think the first thing is making sure that the problem you're trying to solve can be solved by AI.
Ooh.
Because
I want to take over the world.
Yeah. These models are good at a lot of things, but they're not good at everything. And a lot of people seem to treat them as just a general intelligence, and that's not what they are. I enjoy crocheting, for instance, and one thing I tried to do was ask it to come up with a crochet pattern for, I think I was looking for some type of a sock at the time.
Yeah.
And it did a terrible job of coming up with a crochet pattern because spatial reasoning is not built into it, right? It does not understand the shape of a sock. It doesn't understand how the stitches need to go together for that. All it's doing is it's saying I'm going to look back at a lot of crochet, instructions that I've had in the past. I'm going to put them together. I'm going to come up with an answer that looks a lot like those that I think is applicable here. But those instructions could be for baby socks and adult socks. They could be for, all different types and styles of socks. And then they just all get mixed together and you're not going to end up with something that actually makes sense. So, really think about your problem. Does it require a true understanding of a system, a logical system, or is it something where a language model is actually the right tool for it? So, and I think that's step 1 for pretty much anywhere. And then I think step 2 is probably actually a budget discussion, because these models right now are a little bit cheap. They're kind of subsidized by the VC capital that's flowing around. They're not going to be cheap forever, and when you put one into production, it's going to be running on some infrastructure, and that's not going to be free. And a lot of the problems that I've seen people applying these large language models to only really make sense in a very low cost environment.
Right.
And so before you make a significant investment in this, make sure that the payoff of adding a large language model into this is really going to be worth what it's actually going to cost, because you can't assume that the prices of today are going to hold. And then I think after that, you can like start looking at Hugging Face. You can start scoping out your infrastructure requirements based on which model you're going to get. Start thinking about your data. Those steps all kind of come later.
Because I think we've talked about in the podcast a while back about, how much, Kyle, you bought a brand new computer so that you could draw some random pictures, right?
Yeah, and it had nothing to do with the new Baldur's Gate at all. But
it was the top of the line, and it was supposed to be super awesome for this. And
12 gig of VRAM, so I could create funny pictures. And then Stable Video Diffusion came out and required 16 gig of VRAM. So I chucked my other one in the trash. I just threw it away and got a different one. No, it's like, well, now I feel like I have a sense of loss, like I missed out or acted too soon. I think some of that's getting more efficient. And it's like, well, now you can do it. It's like they figured out better ways. And that stuff changes all the time. You're watching this all unfold, grow up, and it's still like, is it a baby? Is it a toddler? I'm thinking this thing's a toddler still and has a lot of growing up to do.
The computational requirements are just not something that the average person even dreams of, just to draw some pictures or do some other computations.
And you have like these, Amazon and Microsoft are investing heavily in infrastructure, and NVIDIA stock has gone insane because it's the realization that it's the NVRAM that's going to do all this, and they've got kind of the market cornered on that. And they have a new card, it's like $30,000. That's insane. And
I'd rather have the car
gobbled up by, Microsoft and Amazon and other companies that are investing heavily in, compute power.
Yeah. And I mean, the models will continue to improve and become less computationally intensive. I think there's also a technology component. You have GPUs, you have TPUs coming out now. Like, we're going to solve some of these questions, but I think another side of that also is like, if you hear what people are talking about with AI, I've been hearing people talking about everyone kind of having an AI personal assistant. You're talking about like hundreds of millions of these AI personal assistants, and like right now running one of those AI agents is extremely computationally intensive. Even if you solve that kind of computationally intensive problem, the fact that it's going to scale out, I think it's going to be similar to crypto, where the compute power is just always going to be a kind of a hard stop that we're going to be limited by. Because at the end of the day, like it's consuming electricity, it's consuming, it's creating carbon, it's doing a lot of negative things that have real costs, right? And we can't just say that technology is going to solve all of those necessarily.
Well, and then having this like in someone else's hands, having to like using paying for ChatGPT or any of these other things, they're doing what they want to do with it. They're charging what they want to charge for it. So there's probably an impetus to bring things in-house and run them in-house so that you don't have to do all that. But that's, you're looking at a big investment there. We've had this discussion before on the podcast, but John, do you see that kind of happening?
Do you mean in terms of like owning,
like having your own GPT on site on your own servers?
I think it's possible in some of the like really more conservative industries, banking, government, things of that sort. You probably could see some of that happening, but I think those are also the industries that are least likely to adopt these technologies, at least quickly. So I don't know to what extent I would expect that to happen. I haven't really thought about that. I could see it kind of going both ways.
Camille, how about you? What are you seeing for industries taking up the gauntlet and running with ChatGPT or whatever?
Yeah, I mean, there's been some good examples of people who have done a lot of data collection and then slowly kind of narrowed in on what their users need and their experiences. So, for example, like a good example is Notion. They did a lot of research and they did a lot of collecting of what users are actually going to use their AI embedded tool for. And they actually created a like menu that users can choose from in their AI like drop down. So they narrowed in enough on what users are actually going to use the tool for, and it's generative in that it's a note space, so that things like find my action items from my my meeting note became really relevant, and less relevant in the sense of there's not recommendation of policy of like what their pricing tiers look like, right? It's helping their users achieve their task in a more efficient way, in a more effective way, in a useful way, in a helpful way that's kind of fun to use. And we'll go back to that, the pragmatic side of it and the hedonic side of it, right? Of that experience. From a user point of view, if I can get my task done faster and it's kind of fun to do, I'm going to keep doing that, right? But that consequences side of it is something that I think in the business world, we still are dealing with. How does this actually make sense to implement? In what experiences does it actually make sense to implement versus having just a general, like all recommendations, all types of chat inquiries are going to go through this thing, right? So it really comes down to, as a business, what are we willing to sacrifice and how many resources are we willing to devote to this thing? And answering those questions will help you determine, how quickly you're going to be able to go to market with some kind of AI tool and how, dedicated you are to the idea of improving the user experience with an AI tool. If you just want to apply it to everything universally, it's going to be a bad user experience.
And then, there's, of course, things that I want it to do. I did a lot of content management, migrations, cleanups, whatever, categorization, taxonomy. And it was always difficult because it wasn't my content. I didn't know what they should keep or throw away. And that was a kind of an arduous process to take the business through, because you don't want to just move the same garbage to a new can and think you've saved the world.
But it's a very well sorted can of garbage.
And John, I had talked to you about this and about pointing it at a big directory and having it categorize, organize, clean up. And you said it can't do that. And my heart sunk.
Yeah, sorry. It kind of goes back to what I was talking about earlier with like the crochet example. The system is essentially going to be looking for times when people have asked a similar question to what you're asking and what answers were given at that point. It's not going to be able to like logically understand how your file system is organized or what is a more optimal way of doing that. I mean, these are the kinds of things that AI researchers are working on right now. We hope that pretty soon we'll get there. But at this point, like, you really use this as a word calculator. That's kind of what it is, right?
So are we saying like the Enterprise, all that giant ship was basically the compute power just to run the computer responses for the captain at this point? That
yeah,
couple of guns, some teleportation, and all the AI stuff just to
all
answer
those servers.
And log
it's
things.
just a big data center.
Oh, man. So, everybody's hopping on the bandwagon. Who can we trust? Like, what areas, what types of chat bots, like, are, kind of safe to use right now that you're going to have a kind of a good experience with, versus stuff that, it's like the high stakes stuff. What's the low stakes things we can do now to benefit, and kind of get, start that learning curve. I mean, we as a species, as a people, have to go through a learning curve with all of this stuff. And we're still going through the existence of the internet learning curve, the existence of social media learning curve that we're still really bad at. And now we've got this crazy thing. how do we enter into that and start that learning curve so that we don't like fall off a cliff?
I'd go back to the Russian expression "доверяй, но проверяй," which means trust but verify. You've got to make sure that you are, you've got to look over this stuff right now. I don't know that I could say that there is like a company or a model that is like quote unquote trustworthy yet. There might be, but it hasn't proven itself yet. So I would say like right now the right way to use AI is to do it cautiously, right? Take it piecewise, don't go too fast, kind of start small and build from there as you gain more trust in it, as you understand its limitations.
Now, is Google, was it Google that was facing that with their search, or was it Microsoft that was kind of like, oh, it looks like you guys tried to put the AI out there a little bit too early and just having some troubles getting, people were finding that their results varied by quite a lot, and so they've lost trust, right?
Yeah, and I mean, there's an enormous incentive to be the first one out there with the new tool. You can make a lot of money that way, and just keep that incentive in mind, right? When you're looking at using these things, like understand that just because it's out on the market doesn't mean that it's like fully vetted and like ready to go, right?
I do want to make a lot of money. That's true.
Who doesn't?
I don't want to make a lot of money. I just want to have a lot of money.
Oh,
It's true.
Camille, what's the first step for an organization to kind of evaluate what they can benefit from in the AI space?
Yeah, I think like we talked about earlier, looking at what users might use the tool for, but it's really comes down to two ideas: the idea of flexibility, how many topics, how many scenarios, how many workflows, and the idea of ease of use, how useful, how pragmatic is the tool. Those two sort of spectrums are important to consider when you're trying to think of, okay, what is this AI tool going to eventually do for our company? So if you want it to answer a wide range of questions, have a lot of flexibility, and be super useful, you're going to have some investment you need to make that happen for your domain knowledge. And also you're going to need to consider the bounds in which that tool is going to be deployed to be useful and to be flexible in. So is it customer service related? Is it just helping the customer kind of get an idea of what they might want? Maybe generate some, kitchen plans that they could possibly choose from, right? To kind of help them get started with planning their next kitchen renovation. So in those like kind of generative settings, it makes a lot of sense to think about, okay, flexibility, how many options are we going to give the users to interact with this tool? And then ease of use, where is it going to pop up, and is it actually going to be trained and useful? Because that's the huge thing that users are thinking when they're interacting with these tools is this actually going to give me something that I can use?
Yeah.
So how important is kind of user research in that space?
It's big, right? You have to understand what your users are coming to this experience for. Like what is their end goal, right? And what are they actually looking to achieve, and what are their expectations? And the only ways you can kind of get that information is by talking to people, interviewing them, understanding their point of view, getting a good picture of what your users actually look like. So if you have that already, which some companies do this sort of thing, or they have a lot of records from their customer service folks at their company, that can be a great starting point, or even insights from where folks are spending a lot of time on the website or within the app itself. That can get you started, but you do need something to kind of specifically look at, okay, if we could improve XYZ process for you, what does that look like for you? What do you think as a user, right? And obviously there's a lot of theory and ways that we experimentally test those ideas. We don't actually ask users, oh, hey, what do you want? But doing a user research study will help you answer some of these questions, especially if they're big question marks that you don't know the answers to, right? You can find these answers out. You just have to go into a user research study and know that that's what you need to do next to find out.
And John, is there some kind of a data study that you would do? Like going in and so how are we going to use AI? How can we benefit from these things? These are our users. These are what they want. Do we have the data in place to pull that off?
Yeah, and I think a lot of businesses may be surprised to learn that they don't have quite the amount of data that they would need to really implement this the right way. But I think that that's got to be a big part of any engagement that you have with, a potential client who is considering going in and like implementing machine learning or AI. Like, do you have the amount of data that's going to be needed in order to, properly train this model to get it to a place where it's reasonably trustworthy? Because the answer is going to be no for a fair amount of companies. I can't give you a rule of thumb of this much data is the right amount, because it really depends on the question you're trying to ask. Right. It depends on the specific domain. But
the flexibility that you need. Yeah. Yeah,
exactly.
But then the question is, we don't have enough data. How do we get enough data? What do we need to do? We want to start. So how do we start so that we can at some point actually start?
So then it's going to also, I hate to keep saying it depends, but it does kind of depend. In some cases, external data is going to be completely acceptable and can be useful for what you're trying to understand, right? Say you're trying to understand consumer spending, you're working for a finance company, and you only have data on a small subset of the customers in the market. In this case, you could go to a data broker externally and buy the data that you would need in order to train that model, because you're not so much looking at specifically what is my business doing as opposed to what are consumers in general doing. But you could also end up in a situation where there isn't really a good external data source, and the answer is wait. Build data, understand what data you need to get, and then start working on building that, right?
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is even though you have a great idea for AI, or what you think is a great idea for AI, first ask somebody who knows AI whether it can even be done, and second, find out how to focus the attention on the data that you need and the results that you want in order to get even started so you don't end up with ChatGPT on your Chevy dealer site doing whatever it feels like.
Exactly. Yeah.
Selling your truck for $1 or giving out your advice on Canada Air, right?
Yeah, almost any of these examples you can bring up, it was a company that did not really probably put the amount of time and energy into doing that, the kind of due diligence on the back end that's really necessary.
They never asked whether they should. They only asked whether they could do that. Right?
Yeah. And I see that as a race to, it's there's this new toy, there's a race to use it. And so there's people that are making demands of their people to get this going, to use this. So they're going out and getting whatever they can, putting it in place, and then feeling the pain of it. They're the people that were driving self-driving cars 15 years ago.
Yeah.
Your crash, what is your chance of crashing or doing something? At this point, it's pretty high. So we're going to want someone in that driver's seat with their hands on the wheel.
Yeah.
And then, I've been fascinated by the electric car, or the self-driving car, just from movies where they have them. It's well, that's cool. And understanding why traffic jams and traffic happens and not wanting that. But it's well, if it's safer than people driving, great, let's do it. It's no, it has to be way, way, way safer than people before we're really comfortable rolling it out there.
Well, and the training data doesn't necessarily exist, right? You may encounter things that you have never expected to encounter on the road, right?
But I do know that I have sufficiently trained them on what a stoplight looks like and what a motorcycle looks like. All those CAPTCHAs where you're picking the different squares, all of that is for training self-driving cars. I kind of see those in the same space, that the maturity level kind of needs to happen. And I don't think it's too soon to start the process, though, figuring out, okay, how can we benefit? What's the low stakes stuff that we can start with? How do we set up the watcher? Okay, if this keyword is used in a question, then you shove a pop-up right in my face and say, this is how I was going to answer. And then you say, yeah, that's a good answer. Or you say, no. And then you type the answer in. So it's you're a hybrid AI and customer service. Like you're the kind of out there pushing the bike, like taking your hands out. Oh no, wobbling. Put your hands back on.
Yeah.
I guess that's all called training. And like we talked about, training and watching. And eventually we're going to get there.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
It might be faster than we think, but I think it's happening a lot slower than we think it is right now. And we're jumping the gun in a lot of ways just to get it to market and get it integrated, because it's like the idea that if you don't have AI in your system, then you're behind. You're going to lose customers and all that because you don't have some kind of AI thing. AI in your browser, AI in your application. I mean, some of it's, I see people starting to use like the Git Copilot, where it's just making suggestions to somebody that's, right there. Like that's a filter. It's going through a person and they're deciding whether it's good or not. I feel like I'm taking up too much of our time.
I just want to piggyback off of that really quick and say right now it's a lot of entertainment value that we're looking at, right? A lot of that hedonic motivation to be like, ooh, the shiny new thing. Yeah, let's play with it. But that pragmatic, practical aspect of interacting with AI models is still there and very heavily weighed in the customer's mind, especially in those sensitive settings. So that's what you have to weigh as a business too, is understanding these are two things at play. Yeah, that hedonic, like, I want to be the first, like, let's make a lot of money side of it, but also practically, how is this going to work for our users and work for our business?
Yeah, I remember a couple of jobs ago, I was working at a bank, and I was doing people analytics. And I remember this was the time that blockchain was a big thing. And I had a manager who came and was just like adamant that we had to use blockchain somehow in our analyses. We had to like figure out a way to use blockchain. And I was just like, it's not really like, I can't think of a good use of blockchain for like what we do. And I think that a lot of businesses need to have that conversation as well. Like, is this really a fit for what we're trying to do? Because it's the hot new thing. It's the talk of the town. It's what everybody like kind of wants, but it's not a general purpose tool. It's a very specific tool for a specific use case. And so, yeah, I think that conversation is.
It's the old hammer problem where, if you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. But just because you can put a screw into a board with a hammer does not mean that that's how it was designed to operate, or that it will work well over the long term, right?
Or that it's a practical and useful and fast way to do it, an efficient way to do it.
And I'm pretty sure that I can do it with SharePoint. That's all I'm saying. I really want that content management stuff. I've been jonesing for it for years, and I will continue to just point it at our data, make it useful, get rid of the duplicates, accuracy. We want to make good business decisions, so we want to have good data to do that. Any parting thoughts before we shut her down?
You bet. I'll go first. It sounds like we're at the beginning. We're not at the end. Do your research. Get Camille and John in there, and that team will do an amazing job and tell you what you need to do in order to get to step 2, because you're probably not at step 1 yet.
Yeah, I see that as just a natural pairing. Your usability, user side, user experience, user research, and then behind the scenes, the data and the training models and all that stuff. It is hopeful to me that there are things like Hugging Face out there as a great start, because starting from scratch for every one of these things would be insane.
My parting thought is we aren't at 0, right? Like we're somewhere between 0 and 1. And if you're not thinking about AI yet as part of your business solutions, maybe this conversation has opened up a couple of like small ways that you could look into it, right? It is a technology that is not going away. And so I don't want to turn anyone off from trying to investigate it, right?
Right.
So that's just my hopeful note at the end here.
I like that.
Yeah.
John, how about you?
Yeah, I wanted to similarly strike a hopeful note. I feel like I'm kind of coming off a bit as the skeptic here. I'm skeptical of some uses of AI, but I am overall very optimistic about the future of this field. There's a lot of stuff that AI can't do right now, but there are some very, very smart people who are very well resourced and are spending a lot of their time trying to solve these issues. I don't know when we're going to get to AGI or whatever, but I think, for instance, Kyle, that the idea of having an AI that would be able to help you like organize your files. It's not here yet, but it's coming, right?
That's all I wanted to hear.
Everybody wants to organize their files.
Well, they don't want to. They just need to. I think with that, we'll say goodbye, everybody. Thanks for joining us, Camille and John. I think this is a really good conversation to have, and we need to keep having these types of conversations. With that, we'll say goodbye, everybody.
Thanks for having me.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Solution Design Group is a digital product consultancy in Minneapolis. Check us out on the web at solutiondesign.com or look for us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram at Solution Design Group.